Yeah. See, when we talk about cyber hygiene, that's an example of just being funky. Not having, that's cybersecurity BO.
It's not the 0 day. It's the day 1400 vulnerability that seems to be the crux for a lot of data breaches that we've seen. This is tradition. I don't want to get us into a tangent, but this is traditionally why like engineers and cybersecurity guys, we don't get along, right? Because it's stuff like this. It seems like a cavalcade of errors, so to speak, right? It's a lot of things that have kind of going wrong. If somebody I truly cared about was using a service that was supposed to safeguard passwords that was the victim of a massive data breach, I would ask them why on earth are they still using that service. Welcome back to another episode of the Cyber Guys podcast, the cybersecurity podcast for everybody. My name is Andrew Valencia, and as always, I am joined by Michael C. Hill. And Mike, today we got to talk a little bit more about LastPass because it's just getting worse, the news that's coming out. And I think that it speaks a little bit more to how we deal with, the application of enterprise cybersecurity.
Yeah.
But first, if this is your first time joining us on the Cyber Guys podcast, welcome. Go ahead and make sure you subscribe, hit that like button so that you can see all the new content that we have coming at you every single week. And if you're returning, hey, thanks for coming on back. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about what we just found out this past week about the LastPass hack and how that affects us in our application of cybersecurity as a whole.
Yeah, it's really good that we're circling back to this because last time we talked so much about passwords and password management, but this one really highlights another really important fundamental of good cybersecurity. We call it cyber hygiene. We call it the basics of cybersecurity. And this is an incident that really highlights the importance of not forgetting the fundamentals.
So, So real quickly, let's talk about the specifics of what's been discovered, what's been documented, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the broader picture here. So, the LastPass breach, right? We've talked about it a couple of times. It looks like it's been the entire hack itself is the result of a DevOps engineer not patching a service that he was using on their home computer system. So specifically what's come out is that the streaming service Plex had a security vulnerability update, a patch that was published back in 2020. And that is what was used by hackers to gain access to this individual system. And that's where the LastPass breach started, due to security patches that were over 3 years old not being installed on a DevOps engineer's home computer.
Yeah. See, when we talk about cyber hygiene, that's an example of just being funky. Not having, that's cybersecurity BO. That's some body odor, poor cyber hygiene. Now, what are we talking about when we say cyber hygiene? Let's just break it down very simple. Just like physical hygiene, there are certain basics that everyone's expected to do. Take a bath, put on some deodorant, clean your clothes, wash your hair, get the gunk out your eyes after you wake up, basic things. Now, what are the basic things in cybersecurity? Well, good passwords we've talked about, but also things like keeping the security baseline of your software up to date. In other words, if there's a patch it. That's basic cyber hygiene. In this case, no one had to do anything super sophisticated. The hacker didn't even have to be a genius. It really just brings up the topic of what is the cyber attack life cycle. All right. And the first day of the cyber attack life cycle, we call that the 0 day, right? A 0 day means we discover the vulnerability when it's being exploited. The thing about that, how many people can really find a vulnerability on their own and develop an exploit for it on their own? The list of sophisticated hackers that can do that is actually very short. I mean, that's why we worry so much about APTs, right? Andrew, we worry about these guys that actually develop new technologies for breaching systems.
Absolutely. And I don't want to jump ahead. And don't get me wrong, 0 days are definitely something that is concerning and things that, cybersecurity experts need to focus on. But we've seen time and time again that a lot of these massive breaches don't come from 0 days.
No. Yeah.
They come from systems that haven't patched a vulnerability in 3 years. In 3 years.
Exactly.
That's a it's not the 0 day. It's the day 1400 vulnerability that seems to be the crux for a lot of data breaches that we've seen.
And that's the point. I mean, think about it. When it's a 0 day, you only have a few genius hackers out there that could come up with it. Very, very, very few. But what happens? Eventually, once they figure out that an exploit works, they've identified the vulnerability, their tactic for exploiting that vulnerability is functional. It works. Well, now what do they want to do? They want to actually codify it. They turn it into what we call an exploit kit, a program, some sort of cyber weapon, something that can be deployed, something that maybe can be downloaded through a phishing attack, whatever, something that once they get in with this tool, and it really is a sort of tool that they've written to exploit the vulnerability that they've identified at day 0. But once they've written the code, guess where it goes next? The dark web. It goes to hacker sites. It goes for sale in the black market. It goes somewhere where now it's being propagated. Now it's not just part that one genius guy.
Huh? Yeah, it becomes part of automated tool sets that anybody can use.
And that's the thing, because even in the early days of propagation, it's still going to be a finite set of people. But once it's out there in the web and in the Tor sites and in various different mechanisms that are used by the black hat characters out there, well, it's just a matter of time before everybody has it. And then once everybody has it in that community, then it becomes so common that guess what we start doing? We start actually introducing it into our ethical hacking classes as part of our threat and offensive security threat management. In other words, with ethical hacking, the goal is to know the tools, techniques, and procedures of the black hats so that we can better defend against them and also simulate the attacks to do more thorough testing. But the point is, once it gets to the point that we know about it in the academic community and we're teaching it in the class, anybody, what we used to call script kiddies or even script monkeys, anybody could exploit the vulnerability. So the idea that this guy, a DevOps guy, made that blunder, it says a lot, doesn't it?
This is tradition. I don't want to get us into a tangent, but this is traditionally why engineers and cybersecurity guys, we don't get along, right? Because it's stuff like this. But see, we talked about this before, right? And I mentioned anytime we get something like this into an academic setting, it should mean that it stops being an effective tool for hackers, right? Because we know about it. We know how to do it. We know how to defend against it. And it's a lot less complicated than people may expect. But at the end of the day, I see this being an issue, a twofold issue, right? I think first and foremost, you have to have considerations for the enterprise and the organization when it comes to how to safeguard your systems and your people and your data and your resources from third-party exploitation. Just because you have a user that uses, in this case with LastPass, uses Plex on their home system, all of a sudden now you have a whole nother vector of attack that you have to consider, that you have to do something about, right? There's a blind side there for a lot of organizations due to third-party applications, third-party services, things that are well outside their purview. And they have to consider how to address those things. Yeah. One of the ways that we do that, obviously, good.
No, you know, this kind of reminds me of, there's an old adage, the shoemaker's children have bare feet. The idea that this person who is a professional at producing something, doing something, doesn't take care of home is a story that we hear over and over and over again. And sometimes, I can even say I've been guilty of it. I don't do half of what I should do and what I know how to do, when it comes to systems that I take for granted sometimes, and it can be, it would be humiliating to be, hacked, but it's something that as a professional, he should have known,
Well, and that's the thing is we don't know the LastPass policy on work from home, telework, or accessing work resources from like home computers. Like we don't know what they have in place security wise. None of that's really come out yet, or I haven't seen anything come out yet. But I think it's safe to assume
that may not come out.
And then that may never come out. It probably won't, to be honest with you. Yeah. Unless they unless honestly they decide to throw this person under the bus, which they, who knows? Because they're,
when they're doing damage control, that's possible. You're right.
Is there any kind of there's liability issues, I'm sure, but anyways,
sure.
The point being though is we don't know what the security was in place on the LastPass side. However, we do know the security that was in place on the Plex side, right? Which was where this initiated. And that was taken care of by the organization, by Plex, through a security update. When a piece of software gets a patch or an update, it has to get installed because of things like this. It can cascade into a huge mess that, you didn't even see coming.
Yeah, it really can. And, I'm a big advocate of zero trust architecture and the idea of not trusting an endpoint anyway. But when you're talking about internal developers producing the source code for a system, that has to be a trusted situation, a trusted environment. And depending on the extent to which he was using some remote host, that's a problem. But but there are solutions for that. That's where you get into VDI. That's when you use mechanisms that don't actually allow you to trust the home computer at all. There are ways to do it to resist or to make the probability of that sort of an attack extremely unlikely. But it seems like their policies and their architectures to facilitate his work from home or wherever he was working from assigned a little bit too much trust to his endpoint.
It's possible, but there's a lot of ways around this, right? Work from home is becoming a mainstay. It's becoming a norm now, and a lot of organizations, organizations we've worked with before, if there is a need to get access to back-end resources, you typically do it through a VPN, right? You do it through a VPN, so you have secured access, you have authentication measures set up, typically multi-factored, right? And you have some sense of security for whatever environment you're going to be working in. It's hard to say what happened in this specific case, but at the end of the day, there was a clear lapse on the user end. And that is, we can only conjecture, we don't know for sure what exactly happened or what the thought process was behind, not updating Plex. But, it's really easy to look at these kinds of services or software and forget about them, not do the update or go, I'll get to that tomorrow, tonight, whatever, and just forget about it. And all of a sudden, that's the way you get breached. That's the vector of attack. And then you become a victim.
And it's funny. I want to give a shout out to a colleague named Dustin Robbins. One time we were working a situation together, and I'm an old Java developer, and I'm thinking about how Java works. Now, the way Java works is it's designed with the principle of write once, run anywhere, right? So the idea of the code never actually running on the local machine, but running in a Java virtual machine, a runtime environment. Now, because of that, I was having a hard time seeing how a breach was actually happening. I was like, it just didn't make any sense to me. What I knew got in the way. And my colleague Dustin said, well, hey, did they update the local installation of the JVM? And, a light bulb went off, and obviously I ran down, talked to everybody about it and everything. Matter of fact, I made such a big deal about it. Dustin said, hey, that was my idea, but it's all good. It was a team effort. But the thing is, because he was not a developer and he was used to dealing with software, he saw it from the perspective of software baseline. While I was trying to find a programmatic solution, I was trying to find some sort of architectural, logical solution to the way the actual code was processing. And it had nothing to do with that. That was not the issue. That wasn't the vector. That wasn't the weakness. That wasn't in any way where the problem was. His perspective allowed him to see just the simple thing of the part that is installed. Is it up to date? And guess what? They do. Even though source code will work from generation to generation in a programming environment like Java, they do have to update their JDKs and SDKs and their runtime environments on a regular basis, because new ways are found to break in through a back door because of the runtime environment that processes the Java code, which is bytecode, and processes it down into the machine code that works on a particular platform. But that's kind of what happens sometimes. I can see how a developer is thinking on one level, but we know how we deal with computers. They're layers, and something that's happening at a totally different layer. Sometimes you'll have a blind side to it. I'm not saying that to defend the guy. I'm just saying that is something that does happen. And I think that's where training and reminders, even of people who are technically sophisticated, are still important.
I think it happens to security engineers. I think it happens to CISOs. I think it happens to CIOs when they're instituting policy, that the idea that that you can get hacked, it must be complicated, right? Because we have these various safeguards in place. We have Shiny Box A that prevents whatever and monitors intrusions and so on and so forth. And the idea that, I don't know, some, DevOps engineer just didn't install the patch. That often is the case. We've seen those kinds of situations play out where the users are the weakness, right? Where the users are the weakness, whether it's not following policy, not knowing policy, or so on and so forth. There's a lot of ways around this, right? Like on my phone requires me to do a software update, and it reminds me 2-3 times. And then there's a point where I can't use my phone anymore until I actually, do the update. There's a lot of ways around this, but
and that's really what I was going to say. That's really what I was about to say. When you think about it, do we really want to rely on the user to be responsible for something so critical? There has to be a way of either creating some sort of quarantine process or some sort of health check process that eventually locks a system out until it, reaches a certain level of integrity, security integrity, or something. I mean, there are tools that check to make sure that everything is up to date before trusting it. Obviously that probably wasn't the case here, but and maybe they've already thrown him under the bus. Maybe the report that we got is them throwing him under the bus. Maybe it's not even entirely true. Maybe he did keep stuff up to date. Let's just assume that the report is accurate. Assuming that the report is accurate, let me say, just assuming that the report is accurate, it means that their process relied upon him to maintain the security baseline. That is not good process.
Right.
We always talk about the three legs, right? You got people, you got technology, you got processes. That's a bad process if the only way your security is intact, if a user of that system has to update and maintain security baselines. That's a problem. That's not good process.
I do think it's important to know where this report came from, right? So, and we'll put our sources in the comments below, but or in the description below. But this information is coming from a lot of different sources. But one of the ones that actually got a quote from Plex was the Hacker News, and the Hacker News basically has an article on this. And what Plex provided was the statement that we're not responsible for this breach of LastPass, because it came from a vulnerability that is 3 years old that we patched 3 years ago. And that was not installed on this user system. So that's, I think, Plex covering their bases. And mainly because what came out in the last couple of weeks was that the DevOps engineer, there was rumors about where the vector of attack, was, how they actually got access to the system. Was it a whaling attack? What kind of thing happened? And it started coming out that Plex may have been related to this because it was on a home system. And so it makes sense for Plex to get ahead of this and basically say, yeah, it was that, but we're not responsible for it, right? So it definitely was a third party issue. And the responsibility is really, unfortunately, on this, this engineer. Unfortunate for them. But the way LastPass has their security, obviously we know ways to get around this and not put the responsibility of securing our environment on the user who doesn't know how to do that.
That's kind of my point. Not all users have to be novices to still be treated as users.
Right.
And in this case, I have to go back to process because, we've talked about BYOD before, bring your own device. And generally the concept of BYOD is anathema. People are like, oh my God, how could you ever have a trusted enterprise environment where people are bringing in a motley collection of various types of devices, different configurations, different security status and all of that? Sounds like a nightmare. And it does if you have your architecture and your processes built around the necessity for endpoint security. In this situation, I think we're seeing that an attempt at doing a halfway job of a BYOD sort of approach. I mean, why is he using a home computer, and why is a home computer an effective attack vector? I mean, we have to assume that home computers are going to get breached. The idea is that can they pivot off that home computer and affect something more sensitive? And if they can, that's bad architecture. That's bad process. That's bad design. Yes, the engineer in his home computer should have had the 3-year-old update updated. But you also have to question why his home computer was connected
had access to a DevOps environment. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Had access to a critical environment that was part of a commercial security company. I mean, think about what LastPass is. I mean, they're supposed to be protecting everybody's passwords. I mean, and
I'll be honest with you. That's why this has created fodder for months at this point, because they built their entire brand on being secure, right? That's the whole idea. And
just use your home computer. Oh, we don't do any health checks of our endpoints. Oh, you want to use this third party streaming service? Oh, we don't care about that. Hey, why don't you do some split tunnels to your VPN while you're at it?
I think there's another consideration. I think there's another consideration that is even worse, right? That they didn't know that this individual had access, right? Maybe it wasn't condoned, but they didn't know. So it's incompetence, right? I mean, because that's where you come into the play where it's like, why aren't you checking? Why don't you know that somebody has, essentially backdoor access to your development environment? That's not good, right? We see that a lot in unregulated industries, right? Where you kind of have, environments that are built to be quick, fast, efficient, and get the job done, but they're not always the most secure, right? And that's what we're I'm not going to throw that out there. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but I have a feeling that this is stemming from a lot of that.
Well, and I think it also speaks back to something we've talked about before of where people place cybersecurity in their, tiers of importance. And very often they just say, throw some technology at it. We don't need to have people that are, looking over. Matter of fact, we're an IT organization. We're a technology company. All of our guys know cybersecurity. We don't need to hire cybersecurity guys or hire a third party company to look at whether or not we have effective security governance, because we're all gurus. Yeah. And look what happened. The problem is people by nature are always going to look for a shortcut. They're going to create backdoors. The reason why we find so many backdoors in software is because, the developer produced the backdoor so that they could have a shortcut for getting to whatever they need to get to in their program. We used to call them maintenance hooks. And guess what? When we transition from the development stage of the software to the production stage of the software, we forget, or the developers would forget, to close those backdoors up and resecure it because, we're not thinking about that. We're thinking about the deadline. We're thinking about the bonus we're going to get when this thing goes live. We're thinking about the party when we do the countdown and Jello shots or whatever else they're going to do to celebrate. They're not thinking about the reality that they opened up some back doors while they were doing their job. And yes, they were doing their job, and it was for the expedience of doing their job, but it was a security mistake.
And then typically you have security assessors go in and point out, hey, you forgot to close out all these back doors. You should fix that before you go ahead and put this into a production environment. That's not always done. In fact, that's often
not like it should. And often what's done is they'll do a sequence of testing, but they won't actually hire truly competent application security specialists to do that testing. They'll let their own internal team, grade their own homework and say, yeah, we did the testing. We did regression testing. We did stress testing. We did some security testing. We did XYZ, but did you do some penetration testing? Did you actually do more than just stress testing through fuzzing? Did you actually, look for malicious vectors? That's not something that is part of even a lot of organizations' SecDevOps procedures. It's just not there. So this is just a combination of a lot of blunders that are very obvious for us to see, and we're looking at it from 30,000 feet. We're looking at it from a great distance, and we can see huge blunders here.
Yeah,
and of course,
I can't imagine what the incident reports. Yeah. Got detailed in it, right?
Oh my God.
I mean, it's got to be a wealth of blunders here. Because I mean, you remember the response. We're not going to go into the LastPass hack itself. That's another episode, maybe worth of content that we could go into. But it seems like a cavalcade of errors, so to speak, right? It's a lot of things that have kind of going wrong, and it kind of stems from like ultimately giving a standard user or a user too much power in ensuring that the environment itself is secure. And I think that's why what some of the things that we run into a lot when we work with our customers is looking at their environments and showing them something they've never seen before. I didn't know this asset was able to access this, or I didn't even know that this person had this device on my system, or I didn't even know that this piece of software was installed on this server. And that is such a precarious position to be in when you're trying to secure an environment, when you have these random things popping up left and right, so many blind spots that, of course, you're going to have so many vulnerabilities associated with them. And this might have been one of those cases where they just didn't have a handle on what their environment actually was. And this is a complete blind spot for them.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be interesting to see in the coming months. I would be interested to see what happens, what their response is with this DevOps engineer. I would imagine. I would imagine that if they had stuff. I mean, I'm sure if they had stuff in place that was supposed to guard against this type of issue, or the engineer just violated cybersecurity policy. I mean, I don't know. What do you do then as a company? You put out liability statements. You sue. I don't know. Maybe there's a civil suit in this at some point. But
and
I don't know.
In the end, there's very little that they can do to their employee, but there's a lot that the users of LastPass could do against LastPass. I mean, the way this thing is going, I'll be surprised if they're not filing Chapter 11, if not Chapter 7, bankruptcy in the near future, because this has to be an existential threat to the company. Now, we're not saying, to take any financial action or make any decisions or abandon your use of this. We're not, for or against, we're agnostic. But, when you look at all this information, you may find yourself coming to a particular decision with respect to.
I'll be a little bit more black and white about it, right? If I or somebody I truly cared about was using a service that was supposed to safeguard passwords that was the victim of a massive data breach, I would ask them why on earth are they still using that service, right?
You got to wonder at some point.
I don't know what I don't know the level of trust a user can have in a service that has been the victim of something like this, especially seeing the circumstances surrounding the breach itself, right? Yeah. And I think I think that's why, as just a general, and coming from like a general user's perspective, I think that's why cybersecurity seems so obtuse, and why a lot of people may feel kind of just shut off to even considering, cyber risk, because you got to put so much faith in these companies just to have the littlest bit of convenience on the internet, that the alternatives are really hard to deal with and consider, right? When you consider, maybe these people really don't know what they're doing, or maybe they don't have my best interest in heart, right? That's a whole, but that is something that users should be asking themselves when they do sign up for services like these. I mean, it is a personal responsibility thing, I think, to an extent, that you have to investigate what are they doing, how are they doing it, and does it fit? Is that okay for me? Like, can I accept the risk of allowing these people to control my passwords to everything I use?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But the fundamental lesson here is practice good cyber hygiene. There should never be a situation where a 3-year-old vulnerability is the vector of attack that takes you down. That's like losing your job because you haven't bathed in a week, a month, or some amount of time that just makes you foul. Because it's inexcusable. If you miss a day, people may forgive you. May even tell you, as a friend. But if you are just perennially funky, no one wants to be around you. This is bad cyber hygiene. No one should have a 3-year-old vulnerability as the vector of attack. And just make that, for everybody at home, just keep that in mind too. Check your system for vulnerabilities. There are ways to do it for free. If you're a student, you can download a copy of Nexus for free. And many others you can use some open source stuff. There are different tools that can scan. You can scan your own system and say, "Hey, is everything on my system up to date?" And maybe we'll do a video talking about some of the tools in the Kali Toolkit. For instance, there are tons of tools. Free tools.
At the very least, make sure your operating system is up to date. I mean,
make sure the OS is up to date, but also make sure your software is up to date. But in the options or settings of just about every program, there is an option you can turn on saying, "Keep my system up to date." Mm-hmm. Do it. Mm-hmm. That's
automatic downloads, automatic
updates. Basic.
All the time, every day. Yeah.
Basic cyber hygiene.
I think there's something else too, though, to this, right? I think the other thing is for individuals on the other side of the fence, the cybersecurity architects out there, the CISOs, the CIOs that are out there. I think you have to assume that people are not showering when they get home. I think you have to make that assumption, and you can't build a huge backdoor into vital resources of your systems for those folks. I think you have to assume that's going to be a risk, and you have to address that risk accordingly.
Hackers are always going to look for the weakest link. If you allow the weakest link to persist in your environment, like the old TV show, bye-bye. You're in trouble.
Yeah, right.
That's it. The weakest link. You're the weakest link. Now they're in. Don't tolerate those weakest links.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look for the weakest link. Secure your six. Well, that's all I really want to say about that one.
All right, that's going to do it for us today on the Cyber Guys podcast. Remember, if you like this episode, go ahead and hit that like button. If you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Hit the subscribe button. Let's go. We're on the road to 100. Let's get us to 100. All right. Let's get us to 100.
Don't say 100.
Well, we're on the road to 100, man. Let's go. All right. Don't forget, you can find us on all of your major podcast platforms. So if you want to go ahead and listen to us, by all means, go ahead and look at the description of this episode so you can see all the links for where you can find us. And don't forget, stay safe, be secure, be sure. We'll see you next time.
Take care.